Alrighty.
Alright, so, as the PowerPoint appropriately says, Internet freedom in the 21st century. And that's my opinion. So, we'll start with the question, how many of you use the Internet regularly? By a show of hands. Okay. Do you like the Internet? Do you like the Internet?
By a continued show of hands, it has its benefits.
How about drawbacks? We're going to get into those. Do you create content on the Internet?
No.
Students, please begin your presentation at this time. Thank you.
So, do you create content? Do you have your own blog? Do you upload videos to YouTube? Do you do that kind of thing?
Does Tumblr count?
Yes, Tumblr. If you create something, take it from your mind, and put it into the Internet. That's what we call creating content. So, if you do that, and you enjoy doing that, there are some things that have happened in the past that could seriously impact your ability to do things like that. And that's going to be bad. You may remember last winter, there were those bills called SOPA and PIPA that were caused a really big uproar in the world, and those could again affect your ability to create content and have that on the Internet. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but let's start by defining what is the Internet. So if I use any technical terms in here, feel free to stop me. I'm happy to explain them. I'll try and keep this not too technical. But if you have any questions about technical things or otherwise, feel free to interrupt me. We're all friends here. So anyway, each computer has its own address on the Internet. And computers use the addresses of other computers to talk to each other computers. And that's how they send information between each other. They all have an address, usually 4 numbers separated by dots, and they can send information between them, and that's colloquially known as the Internet. However, and you can actually see that here. Here's a map of IP space for about 2006. It's a little small, but you get the idea. If you can find America on here.
Found it.
Good.
Why are there two North Americas?
Yeah, why is there USA?
There are 2 blocks of IP space that North America uses. If we zoom in on the main one, we can do this. You see Google. I just want to use a pointer. I have a pointer, might as well use it. So anyway, we see some common websites: Google, Dig, Slash.eBay, Craigslist, like Stacy D's over here. But considering you don't type in 74.125.226.194 to get to Google, there's something in between, and that's called the domain name system, which is a string of text that you have memorized, google.com, facebook.com, youtube.com, that you type into your web browser, and it goes off and asks some server, hey, what's the IP for Google? And it'll come back with that, and then your computer can talk to that address and get whatever it needs. So there's your quick explanation of the Internet. And then next we're going to go into a little bit of brief history between government regulation and existing private industry, because there are some parallels we can draw, surprisingly enough, to railroads in the 1800s. Who would have thought? So anyway, during the expansion age, when we were moving westward, the government, for understandable reasons, wanted railroad connection between the east and west coasts. So there were companies who volunteered to do it, and the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 provided government bonds and land grants and the like to companies building that corridor. There was little federal oversight in there. For your record, there are 16 federal workers in charge of administering land grants, 10 of whom were unpaid. The tax are hard at work at that. So anyway, by 1905, there were about 164,000 miles of track, and they were owned by 6 companies. Most of which are owned by the likes of J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, colloquially known as the robber barons of the Gilded Age. If Mr. Seafield were here, he could elaborate on that, or he could take his class, and he'll be happy to do that for you. But anyway, the negative effects of that, small farmers, they could not compete with the really big companies who had essentially monopolies on the industry, and they couldn't compete with the economics of scale, because they do things on bigger and bigger scale, it gets cheaper and cheaper to do so. So it was much more financially inviable for the smaller farmers to work with the railroad industry here. So then at some point, government decided some regulation of this industry was necessary, and they created the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, to regulate things like railroads, and would eventually be applied telecoms and internet service providers, which is a very similar industry if you look at the way regulation has expanded and contracted over time. Because again, a long time ago, JP Morgan again consolidated the Bell system, which was the main vehicle for telegraphs at that time to be sent. So maybe my parents might remember that kind of age.
They're used to it. Give me back my cookies.
So anyway, the telecom companies were treated as common carriers, which is a term meaning any company providing business of communications and transportation of goods that is otherwise important has to let their services be used equally among other companies. So we were brought into there, and then we can kind of use that same idea. They're the same pendulum between back and forth of a lot of regulation and very little regulation, because you may more recently actually remember with the breakup of the really big telecoms, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, where the Bell system was split up into smaller subsidiaries. Yes, Dad. You're looking at me skeptically.
I actually worked in the Bell system in 1996.
So, and then there was room to a lot of little companies, and over that time they've become to kind of merge back together. And then at this point, there are still really only 2 or 3 wired telecoms from that existing large number that were split up. And if you need your cell phone service, you're pretty much going to go to AT&T or Verizon, one of the 2 main telecoms that exists. So again, as we see, big to small regulation happens and doesn't happen in cycles. So we are currently, with regard to the internet, in a kind of newer field. I'll tie this and make it useful to my presentation. With regard to the internet, it's still a newer industry and relatively unregulated, so we are kind of in the upswing of regulation, or attempted regulation at this point. So we're going to go into something else on the internet that is important, copyright law. Relevant XKCD. And the most important copyright law on the internet was passed in 1998 called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, abbreviated as the DMCA, which came in response to the 1992 Home Audio Recording Act, which is where it was deemed to be legal for you to take your cassette player and record songs off the radio and share them with your friends. You might be able to see the parallel to the internet here, where that it is okay for you to take content and share it, because people like sharing. If I find the technical ability within myself to record a song off the radio, I want to be able to brag to my friends about it. I can do this. Here's a really cool song I heard to boot. So people like sharing, and that was made legal with the current technology available. And the media industry not like that, because they wanted money for their music. And that's another little conflict that has come back big time recently and has existed with many of the other technologies, CDs, DVDs, which as a result of the DMCA, they're actually anti-circumvention systems. So it's illegal for a lot of people to even talk about how to crack a DVD, and there are really, really big prime numbers that are patented numbers that you just can't talk about. So Mr. Ross, the math teacher, might be kind of offended that somebody...
Can you talk about numbers?
somebody actually owns a number, and nobody else can use it, and if you talk about it, you'll be sued for exorbitant amounts of money. So that's what the DMCA does. But one of the main things it does do, and that's most relevant to this, is that the thing called safe harbor provisions, which, if let's say hypothetically that I own a website. We'll use YouTube for an example. So let's pretend that I just founded YouTube, and I have this really cool website that lets people upload videos and share them with their friends, right? So it's possible for me, I know that people can upload some copyrighted content. But the magic of the safe harbor provision is that even if somebody does upload copyrighted content to my website, me personally and my company can't be held liable for that. But I just have to, they will tell me, hey Phil, your website has some copyrighted content on it, you should get rid of that. As long as I get rid of that in a timely manner, I'm not liable. And that's the main channel now by which people can get their copyrighted content off the internet. And it's a functioning channel. If we look here, Google publishes the DMCA removal requests they get. We see, over time, few, a large 17 million requests all in all, which is a pretty big number. And you can see that if you look in the bottom right corner, the sites they target are things like file sharing sites for the most part, and most of the organizations that report them are media companies who own things. And if we look here, we see the biggest copyright owners. Number one is the RIAA, which is the recording industry, or recording people, and the British version of that are the people who give two most reports. And this is just data. We see the huge numbers, 21 million different URLs from just one company, and this is just from one website. So we see this channel functions in a very large scale, and I'm sure you've all seen its effects. How many of you have seen this screen before? We're sorry about that. So if you've seen that, you've seen the DMCA and the ability of and the channel it provides to remove copyrighted content in action. So, and the fact that you still do see these means that copyrighted content on the internet is indeed a problem, and that it's still in existence and one we haven't really been able to exterminate. So, it does still exist. These are some stats from the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, in an article they published on the subject about the amount piracy costs them. And see some numbers they claim here that it's a very, very big deal. Sales have been down a lot, 30 billion songs illegally downloaded, and pretty big numbers, pretty big thing. However, if we do look at some of these numbers more closely, the Congressional Research Service, a slightly more independent body, was asked by Senator Ron Wyden in 2010 for an investigation on the movie industry today as compared to what it was in 1995, some of those same numbers. And the GDP contribution of the motion picture and sound recording industries was 0.04% in both 2009 and 1995. So adjusted, the size of the industry hasn't really changed, and the number of people employed was pretty much the same, 374,000 in 2010, down just slightly from 392,000 in 1998. And then if you look at CEO pay as compared to 2010 and 1995, like some numbers, the Disney CEO was paid 3 times as much as it was in the 90s, Time Warner 5 times as much, and News Corp's NBC executives all cashing in with 2010 salaries of over $20 million. So even though piracy is a problem, the recording industry is not entirely sinking. Here are some pretty charts to back that up. Again, we see GDP, and if you do the math, those come out to 0.37%, 0.443%, and 0.425% contribution over time. Relatively stable with account for various economic fluctuations in between. And we see that gross income from box office is relatively increasing a little bit, and that's relatively constant with inflation. And box office revenue has declined slightly from its peak in 2004 by about $3 billion. However, this is also can be partially explained by a shift to streaming services, so people don't go to the movies as much. If I want to watch a movie, I'll go watch it on Netflix rather than go out and buy a ticket to do so. So, number-wise, we see that the industry is doing okay, and but they claim that they're sinking quickly. So, the industry wanted to do something about that. So, last winter, as we touched on already, 2 bills were proposed in Congress, SOPA and HIPAA, the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Preventing Real Online Threats to Economic Creativity and Theft of Intellectual Property Act. Those were proposed in 2011, the House and Senate versions of a very similar bill, which would try and take pirated content and the sites that host it off of the internet pretty much for good. So, what will happen if these bills were to have passed is the Department of Justice will look around and they can be told by companies to decide if a site infringes or enables infringement of intellectual property. If it is deemed that that is the case, the Department of Justice will notify that website that it is taking action, and a couple things can happen henceforth. Domain registrars, which we talked about before, the intermediary between the IP and the server, who you go ask, hey, what's Google's IP address, can take down the website. So if you get asked what's the IP address? They'll say, there is no website here, what are you doing? And that is one simple way to take things off the internet, which, as we will see, is pretty easy to circumvent. And ISPs, internet service providers, can also block access to these websites. The same steps, by the way, the same ways that are used to filter internet content in China, North Korea, and Iran. So it is not a great stretch of the imagination to see how something like that, if fallen into the wrong hands, can be used negatively. And as far as other things, we see that search engines can stop linking to sites, and it says that payment processing networks, PayPal and such, and ad content networks like Google's AdWords can stop the transfer of money to and from that website. So next I have a little video that'll go into this a little bit more and show you some of the consequences of that act.
The Internet is one of the United States' most robust and growing industries. It enables free and open communication among billions, and it's been the backbone for protests around the world. But a new bill proposes to give the power to censor the Internet to the entertainment industry. It's called Protect IP, and here's how it works. Private corporations want the ability to shut down unauthorized sites where people download movies, TV shows, and music. Since most of these sites are outside U.S. jurisdiction, Protect IP uses a couple different tactics within American borders. Firstly, it gives the government the power to make U.S. internet providers block access to infringing domain names. They can also sue U.S.-based search engines and directories, or even blogs and forums, to have links to these sites removed. Secondly, Protect IP gives corporations and the government the ability to cut off funds to infringing websites by having U.S.-based advertisers and payment services cancel those accounts. In a nutshell, that's what Protect IP will try to do. But in all likelihood, it'll do something else altogether. For starters, it won't stop downloaders. You'll still be able to access a blocked site just by entering its IP address instead of its name. What Protect IP will do is cripple new startups because it also lets companies sue any site they feel isn't doing their filtering well enough. These lawsuits can easily bankrupt new search engines and social media sites. And Protect IP's wording is ambiguous enough that important social media sites could become targets. Lots of trailblazing websites could look like piracy havens to the wrong judge. Tumblr, SoundCloud, and early YouTube, wherever people express themselves, make art, broadcast news, or organize protests, there's plenty of TV footage, movie clips, and copyrighted music mixed in. And even if you trust the U.S. government not to abuse their new power to censor the net, what about the countries that follow in our path and pass similar laws? People around the world will have very different internets, and unscrupulous governments will have powerful tools to hinder free expression.
So, you may have actually seen that video. It was circulated around the internet pretty thoroughly back when Silva and Peppa were in front of Congress. Justin said that he's seen it too. So, I'm not making this stuff up. So, if we move ahead again, we see that some of the complication of this, as we're already briefly outlined, is that censorship will now become to exist because the government can say, hey, you can't visit that website. It means internet service providers must inspect and filter all the traffic of every user, which means somebody out there is going to be watching everything you do on the internet and have it logged somewhere, and if they don't like what you're doing, they'll put a stop to it. It means that venture capital will reduce because if I'm a rich philanthropist who likes to fund little tech startups, I don't want all my money going to their legal bills because somebody may or may not have uploaded copyrighted content to their website. Which means that other jobs too may move overseas to avoid this kind of regulation. And what it'll really do is it'll just kind of stem innovation and make it really difficult for companies like this to get off the ground. So next I've got one more little short video with a TED Talk given by a guy named Clay Shirky, who is a very popular internet journalist, and he gave this talk back last winter again when these bills were big. So.
Get buttons open are nuclear. They're saying we want to go anywhere in the world and censor content. Now the mechanism, as I said, for doing this is you need to take out anybody pointing to those IP addresses. You need to take them out of search engines. You need to take them out of online directories. You need to take them out of user lists. And because the biggest producers of content on the internet are not Google and Yahoo, they're us. we're the people getting policed. Because in the end, the real threat to the enactment of PIPA and SOPA is our ability to share things with one another. So what PIPA and SOPA risk doing is taking a centuries-old legal concept, innocent until proven guilty, and reversing it. Guilty until proven innocent. You can't share until you show us that you're not sharing something we don't like. Suddenly, the burden of proof for legal versus illegal falls affirmatively on us and on the services that might be offering us any new capabilities. And if it costs even a dime to police a user, that will crush a service with 100 million users.
So you got to think about that again on scale, because again, let's go back to the example of me owning a fledgling YouTube. If I need to police then every video that every user ever uploads and make sure that there's nothing wrong with what they're posting. And that takes a lot of time and money that can kill a small startup. So if you want innovation to keep going forward, you've got to make it easier for these companies to succeed, not harder. So, understandably, the internet as a community did not like these bills when they were proposed, with good reason. And there was a very large movement to stop them. Here is a WhiteHouse.gov petition for President Obama to veto SOPA and other future bills that threaten to diminish the free flow of information. We see that over 50,000 people signed it. And that was enough to get an official response, which I'll read some excerpts from. The President did say that any effort to combat online piracy must guard against the risk of online censorship of lawful activity and must not inhibit innovation by our dynamic businesses, large and small. And we must avoid creating new cybersecurity risks or disrupting the underlying architecture of the internet. And we inspect and encourage all private parties, including both content creators and internet platform providers, working together to adopt voluntary measures and best practices to reduce online piracy. So we see that this was a big enough deal, and it's one of the few online petitions that the White House actually responded to well. And then there was a day, January 18th, 2012, where many websites across the internet changed their homepages in protest of these acts because of the terrible effects it would have on their business. So we see here Google's homepage, tell Congress, please don't censor the web. We see XKCD, a very popular webcomic from that day. What?
The certain population is very popular.
So, and in true XKCD fashion, there's a located message if you mess with the contrast on that image. A message from system admins everywhere. Seriously, don't screw with DNS. If you break this internet, we are not making you a new one. So, and then we see the homepage of Wikipedia that day. We see the front page of Wired, a very popular tech news site. And we see the homepage of Mozilla. So it was a pretty big deal, and it really helped a lot of people learn. Where do we go next? Step one is get involved. If there's something going on that the government proposes that you don't like, feel free to take matters into your own hands so that you can change it and make it so it is something you like. I have here somewhere a letter that when SOPA was being in front of Congress, Malay, the wave, and I actually wrote a letter to our representative at the time, Congressman Chris Murphy, opposing the bill, and I have a copy of that here. Skip through and pass around. And we did get a response, which is also
the post
involved.
office.
Yeah.
We did first get a form response about the wrong subject. But they did correct their mistake.
Not a form letter.
Feel free to read that. This was, at the time, a lot of time and effort put into making our opinions heard. So that's step one. Get your voice out there. Keep the internet open. Make sure that people can share their thoughts and ideas freely, because that's what makes it powerful, and what is really the driving force behind the 21st century is that I can see the opinions of anybody I want to around the world, and they can share theirs with me. And the medium with which that happens is the internet. And if we keep that open and let that happen and facilitate that kind of communication, it's really good for all of humanity. And we've got to work additionally to combat piracy more effectively and make it easier. And the best way to do that is to really make it easier to obtain content legally. rather than to pirate it, because the main reason people pirate things is because it's easier than going out to buy it. So if you guys are gamers, if you're familiar with Steam, it is a very easy way to get new games, where it's a computer or a program on your computer which you can select a game you want, which already has your payment information. You can download it and be playing it, limited only by the speed of your internet connection, as well as piracy. So it's easier than going to find a torrent, making sure it's legal, downloading the game and cracking it. It's easier, so it's exploded and it's very, very popular. Same thing goes to Netflix for movies. You can pay a monthly fee and stream all the movies you want. Hulu for TV shows, Spotify for music. This kind of on-demand content is the way forward for the media industry, and it makes it easier for people like me to watch and consume the things I want, and it's easier than pirating it. So that's the way forward. And if we think about even back to the importance of keeping the internet open, last year the United Nations Human Rights Council did even endorse a resolution upholding the principle of freedom of expression and information on the internet. So the United Nations itself has endorsed the idea that everybody has a right to share their ideas online with the world, and you can't have that taken away from you. And that's really the power of what we have built here. So that's all I got for now. Any questions from you guys? Yes, child in the back.
Can you talk about CISPA, C-I-S-P-A? That was a new form of this kind of act that came out.
Yes, it was not exactly the focus of this presentation, but I do happen to know offhand.
I'm just...
That's a pointed question.
Yes, so SOPA and PIPA were defeated in the winter of 2012, about a week or so after the date on that letter. Lamar Smith, the representative who wrote the bill and sponsored it, said, all right, this isn't going to work because there was just so much protest about it. So it went away for a little while, and then what Amay's referring to, CISPA, is kind of the next iteration of that bill. It's a little bit better, but at the same time, it still has some provisions that will, again, disrupt the internet. It's a step in the right direction, but we're not there yet, and that is actually currently as well dead. I'm pretty sure that there aren't any bills like that in front of Congress at the moment. Although they have been trying to snuck through, and there was a bill once about trying to regulate child pornography, I think, that would actually, again, mess with the workings of the internet and the effect to stop that. So it does exist, and really the only way to combat it is to be ever vigilant and get involved in the electoral system. Just.
Is there a reason why the entertainment industry causes such a fear within our government as far as limiting internet?
Well, step one is probably lobbying. Because people don't like change. And if it means for them, at the moment, their industry is very profitable. And they don't want to change that until they absolutely have to. So it's cheaper for them to spend lots of money lobbying. I don't have that in the presentation, but in my paper I have a nice chart about tech versus entertainment industry lobbying. And it's much higher for those who can't see the chart. But because they don't want to put the time and money into creating the new kind of content distribution networks like Steam, Hulu, Netflix, and such, they'd rather kind of fight tooth and nail to preserve the older and more outdated model rather than updating themselves for this century. Yes.
So I see that new softwares like Spotify, Hulu, Netflix, stuff like that provide a cheap and easy alternative to pirating media content, but don't you think that that's relying too much on people, whereas there should be some legal process for battling illegally downloaded content? I'm not saying...
I don't think I said that. They're two separate things.
Well, no, you said, if I understood correctly, that Spotify, Hulu, Netflix, stuff like that made it more convenient to...
Oh yeah, that's the main way to combat piracy. And of course, if I still want to watch The Dark Knight for free, I'm not going to go stream it on Netflix. No matter how easy it is for me to buy it legally, if I don't want to pay for it, I can still go find it.
So don't you think that
So
there should
it's-
still
yes.
be something that combats that?
If I go right here, point number 4, combat piracy more effectively, which could mean updating some provisions of the DMCA to work with this next century and have a better way of reporting things and working with kind of the finicky international law regarding, because a lot of file sharing sites are hosted not in America, and in a lot of ways our laws don't apply to them, not that they listen in the first place. But I don't know what the answer is, but I'm confident if we put a lot of smart people into actually finding a proactive solution, I'm sure there's one that can be found that can benefit everybody. Mr. Seaman.
Well, on that point, do you then think, is there any investigation or need to look at our basic copyright and intellectual property laws? Are they outdated? They were written, obviously, over 100 years ago,
Yeah.
in a different world.
And again, the extent of my research didn't exactly focus on this, but as you're right, copyright laws were not written with the internet in mind, and I'm sure if we get some smart lawyers on it, we can write them to be a little more applicable to the internet and take away some of the gray areas like websites that are both hosted either in the US or foreignly, and we can work with finding a way to regulate content appropriately there. Daddy-o.
Yeah, so this morning when I was reading my Telegraph printout, along with every other major newspaper, one of the top headlines was that the NSA ordered Verizon to turn over records for every single call that's been made, every wireless, every cell phone call, and all internet browsing records that they have. So do you think that that's going to lead us down the path of more government censorship, or is it really just going to be only used for national security like they claim? And maybe even
The
way around some of these laws.
last phrase of that is the imperative one there, as they claim. That news is a little too recent to be included in here, but I think that is, again, a slippery slope, or at least could be, if used improperly. And it's not a very large stretch of the imagination to see that happening. And that if the NSA does have all your phone records,
At this time,
what will it take
presenters are asked
for them to demand your internet records too, and see what you're
all
looking at
parents, friends, and
and
faculty are
try to
asked to
stop
move
you
to their
later.
second
So,
presentation, which will begin promptly at 7:10.
any other questions?
That is Friday.